Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. It's a popular misconception that life in Provincetown completely stops in the off-season. I hear it almost every day in my gallery in the summer when visitors ask me about life in our fair little town. Most assume everything closes down and everybody leaves. But nothing could be further from reality. Provincetown thrives in the winter, and especially, in my opinion, the art colony part of Provincetown. So if you're interested in the arts, there's so much you can do. Classes in a wide variety of art techniques are offered all through the off-season and in a multitude of venues. For example, if you'd like to study with me, well, I have a class at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum between November 19th and 21st, 2025 called Crisp Lines, Bold Shapes, and Introduction to Hard Edge Painting. You still have a couple of weeks to sign up if you're interested at PAAM.org, so PAAM.org. Another fun thing you can do is to come learn some line dancing at the Gifford House with my friend Francis Grant on Wednesday evenings. That's one fun way to keep warm in the winter. The Provincetown Theatre also has programming throughout the off-season, especially through the holidays, so get your tickets now. And the art exhibits don't stop. Currently at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, there's a fantastic retrospective of the work of Blanche Lazzell, on view until January 4th, 2026. So if you're listening in real time, you still have a couple of months to see it if you haven't done so yet, and I have done so already 3 times. So since this exhibit is on right now, Blanche Lazzell will also be the subject of our episode today, as well as the Provincetown printers. And to talk about this most unique artist, I have with me today Mr. Jim Bokker. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Gaston.
How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks.
Welcome to the Art Colony, and tell us, who is Jim Bakker?
He is a seasoned veteran of the antiques and arts world, art historian, but I opened my first shop in 1968, so I've been doing this for 57 years. Started off out in Ayer, Massachusetts, and went to Littleton. I had a gallery on Charles Street in Boston, moved back out to Littleton, and then to Cambridge, which I opened in 1984. And we ran fine art auctions and also did private sales on Broadway in Cambridge. In 1993, I always wanted to have a gallery here in Provincetown. Figured that, I'll do that. So I had one at the Ciro and Sal's alleyway there, where Ray Wiggs was later, and Robin Watson.
That's called Kiley Court, right?
Kiley Court, yeah. Peter Hunt Alley. It's the whole area in the East End with art galleries. One summer was enough for the gallery, but I opened up on Newbury Street in Boston, and in 2001 moved here year-round. Became director of the Pilgrim Monument in 2006 to 2011, and after that decided that I'm going to need some income to continue to pay for my mortgage, and that we're going to open the gallery back up, and we have a gallery down at the Harbor Lounge across from the library, only a few blocks from where Blanche Lazzell's studio on the water was.
And the Bakker Gallery specializes in
historic.
I was going to say vintage Provincetown art.
We have over the years represented, living artists, but our prime focus really is on the historic, and we also do 4 auctions a year. At this point, they're online, and they've kind of remained that way for the past few years since COVID.
I was always interested, when you do these auctions, how do you find all these pieces of art? Where do they come from?
Well, when you've been doing it 55 years, you've seen a lot, it's sold a lot, and some of it comes back. And one of the connecting stories really was in 1985 when I started doing the art auctions. We had some very interesting pieces from Provincetown that brought some of the collectors like Reggie Cabral and Nappy to Cambridge to see what was going on, and he found out that there were other people interested in the Provincetown and the art colony here. I, developed a good friendship with Nappy over the years through his buying, and he's the one that encouraged me in 1988 when he was on the board of the Provincetown Art Association to change their auction to which was a consignment auction to deceased artists, and then they didn't have to really worry about the whole thing of offending different galleries and the artists who wanted to consign, the prices they were getting in the gallery, which is can be the case. It can be even more, but it turned out to be an interesting thing. And he said, "Would you come and do it?" I had been doing the auctions for the Rockport Art Association, and he'd been, like a regular customer coming here, and we had a really important kind of relationship. And then after my gallery here in '93, I asked Robin Watson, "So what does one have to do to be a trustee?" Which was a big joy and maybe a big mistake in a lot of ways for the commitment and time. But I've been very involved in there as a trustee, as vice president, as a president, trustee on various committees.
Well, that's
So
great.
it's a beautiful fit, and I was on the search committee when we hired our our wonderful new director, Chris McCarthy.
She's been there 25 years now.
I know.
Yeah. So if someone is interested in historic Provincetown art, and they want to know more about your auctions, do you know your website?
I do.
I assume you do.
It's Bakker Project. That's BAKKER PROJECT.com, and you can find our exhibitions there, our auctions there, send inquiries there. You can find out when we're open, when we're having an auction. And Spencer Kesey, who's the director there, will take good care of you, and I certainly will do my best.
Oh, good. And today we're here to talk about one part of Provincetown's historic art heritage, and that's white line printing, and also Blanche Lazzell, who's currently showing at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. But to start, I guess we have to define, because I didn't know what it was until I visited the exhibit. What is white line printing? What is the Provincetown print?
The Provincetown Print is a unique version of doing color printing.
Well,
At home, they can't see.
for those watching
But
on YouTube, they can see your shirt.
you
Yeah.
you can see the shirt, and initially it was a Japanese technique that was multi-block. So in other words, basically for every color, they would have a separate block, so they could be 6, 7, 8, 10 blocks to make a print. There were several artists that developed through a thing, where in Europe and in Paris, two of the original printers, Ethel Mars and Maud Squire, they were part of the original group. Mars had been doing prints with 2 blocks, and Squire later wound up, like really adding in like a key block to hers. Before people that started all of this really that became in like the spring of 1915 was Ethel Mars, Maud Squire, Ada Gilmore, and
Mr. Nordfeld.
Nordfeld. But
Yeah.
he wasn't the first one. Mildred McMillan
Okay, Mildred McMillan.
was the other. They had
Yeah.
4, and in the spring they started this, and then Nordfeld came in, and also Juliet Nichols again, and she had been in France, and Nordfeld didn't really have the patience and he wanted to really get to the idea of doing it in one block by going back and forth with the paper and doing the colors in separately as needed. And then, so basically they'd carve out, which would make a little notch that when it was rubbed back down with the paper would create a white line.
So the image is divided in color cells, basically,
Yes,
and every cell is surrounded by a white line, which is where they've
that would be actually
when
into
they
the
dug
wood,
into the
into
wood
soft
piece,
wood. Yeah.
and then they color every single color cell individually, right?
It's all done individually, so it's a unique. No two of these prints is exactly alike. Lazzell added a whole level of it to the composition and how the it was structured and the color and luminosity by adding extra color here or there, watercolor, and then some people actually used oil to do that, created various effects.
So why do you think that this type of printing specifically developed in Provincetown?
I think that it was an advent of like a lot of the people coming back um, at the start of World War I that were in Paris or that had been, exposed to that because people had before that gone to study after they'd been studying in New York, like Blanche Lazzell at the Art Students League. She went over there in like 1913, 14. And these women that were over there basically came over here at that time. So it was a beautiful place where you had light, like on both sides, the Atlantic and the harbor. It's kind of a unique situation. That the other thing people always talk about, the Cape Light that we have here in Provincetown, and it's a unique thing, and it was a unique thing with the Art Association had just been formed in 1914, so there's a convergence of all this intelligence and artists that, were into sharing. And again, during the winter, there may not be that many people here, that they had something that, that they wanted to do together. And, they weren't desperate housewives, but they got together and shared all this, and one print led to another
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Do you think there's a reason why, when we talk about these Provincetown printers, they're nearly all women? Is there a reason this was more of a feminine pursuit?
I don't know, but the first artist that again was, included once they did some of the major shows, like 1983, Janet Flint curated for the National Museum this first show of Provincetown printers. There certainly were men that did prints, but for some reason, I don't know why they didn't necessarily stick with the white line or color printing. You have, well, Todd Lindenmuth, Carl Knaths, which is interesting because he lived with Helen Weinrich, who was Agnes Weinrich's sister, kind of one of the odd threesomes in town. And
Mhm.
they just had an incredible run, but there are not a lot of Knaths woodcuts, and likewise, like Todd Lindenmuth, who was here with his wife. Elizabeth Warren, they thought the town was a little bit out there or whatever, and
Rural.
decided that,
Yeah.
that they were going to head to Rockport. And you have
Okay.
so many people that came here, like Marsden Hartley. We call it like passing through. They were here for a couple of years. One of the bigger white line printers, like at the time, or that was doing color printing, was Gustav Bauman, who wound up going out to Santa Fe.
So let's get to Blanche Lazzell. She's the one currently being featured, and she's often seen as the best representative of the Provincetown white line print. So let's talk about Blanche Lazzell. Okay, where does she come from? Tell us a
She
bit about of her biography.
Sure. She was born in West Virginia in 1878 in Maysville, which is like kind of a few miles out of Morgantown, and essentially it was a place where there were a lot of older women that were unmarried. But she referred to herself as a country maid and not an old maid. She was there, then she studied at the Art Students League, and in 1915, she made her first visit to Provincetown to study with Charles Hawthorne,
And at
who
that point, she was studying painting.
painting, and she considered herself a painter. It wasn't a hobby or something, like people often assume or make assumptions that these prints were made. They were, a good economic drive for the artists, but they really truly believed in it. So she came here in 15, and in 1916 she came back here again. She'd been going back and forth to initially to West Virginia, but then went to New York and was studying there with William Schumacher. And she came back in 1916 here, and that's when she first saw like the Provincetown prints, and she studied those and learned how to make them with Oliver Chafee, who later married Ada Gilmore,
Who was one of the
one of
original.
the original
Yeah.
printers.
Hmm.
And from that, she wound up going to New York that year and studied with William Schumacher, who was up at the Woodstock Art Colony at the Birdcliff, and that's kind of the initial start before 1918 when she actually came here and decided that she was going to settle down here.
Do we know what she was like as a person?
Well, she was hard of we know she was hard of hearing, and that, she wasn't deaf, but, so
There had been a childhood
a
illness.
childhood illness,
Yeah.
and which had kind of run through with some bad luck with some of the other family members. But she became very active, with this, first kind of group in the art association, in the hanging when they had the separation between the conservatives and the moderns, and in the hanging committees there. And later in life, was very active, one of the exhibitors at Forum 49, which was one of the big things. And in the meantime, she had actually took, lessons with Hans Hofmann here. So there was a big move, like in the progression of what she was doing,
So the full title of the exhibit is Blanche Lazzell
becoming
becoming
an American
an American
modernist.
modernist. We've talked about her coming to learn with Hawthorne. Well, that's not exactly what we talk about when we talk about modernism. That's not necessarily Hawthorne. So how did
So
she get there?
she sees, probably much more of that with Schumacher, which is why she went to continue to study with him. And then 1923, early 20s, she went back to Paris, and she studied with Albert Glass and
I also saw she
Fernand
was Fernand Léger, who's
Léger.
somebody I
You
love.
admire.
Yeah, I
I think
do.
we all admire
Yeah.
that. She definitely brings that back in, and what she brings back with her is this cubism, which she adds into the abstraction of her previous works.
So tell us, if we don't have the works in front of us, how does it trans how does it go from being more traditional to more modern? What do we see in the work?
You see a real progression of it, and in the when she got back, so in the late 20s, she started on these painting number one painting. And we have one of the famous groups of these, and you see the progression of these paintings in that show. The Art Association in the permanent collection has painting number 12, and these are all abstract, uh, very, very abstract, but becoming cubistic. And I think that the key painting that they kind of show that really brings in this transition is one that was done in 1930, called The Shell. You get, like the whole cubist thing to the form of the shell and the background.
And before then, was she doing mostly landscapes or?
Well, the early, and the show doesn't really focus a lot on that earlier work, but it's represented. Um, and the Art Association has a great collection of Lazzell, and through the gift of the Helen and Nappy Van Derrick, not only like a wonderful white line print, but also the study for it, and that's another thing at the show currently at PAAM, that you can really get an idea of how these things came into progression with like studies for the work next to the work
Yeah,
for
that's
the
one thing that's
print.
great about the exhibit. You can actually see the progression of an idea through multiple pieces
Exactly.
and how it advances into becoming, the final piece. Since we have so many of these, well, not so many, we have a bunch of them, these Provincetown printers. Why is it that Lazzell is considered to be the best representative of them?
Well, outside of the monetary factor that's
Okay.
happened over
Yeah.
it, she had a large body of work. I mean, it was something that she just continued to do. She, like opened up her studio to people coming into town for 2 hours a day. She taught lessons, individual lessons, or however, and
I actually read a study about that, about Blanche Lazzell and her economic strategy, that she was very, very good at being self-sustaining because, as you said, she was doing teaching, so she was making money from that. She was doing print sales to tourists and collectors, anywhere from $5 to $25, so there was a range. She was doing studio demonstrations that often led to purchases. She was also selling seeds. So she had a big
the
garden,
garden. She,
that she was, collecting seeds from and selling those seeds. She was hosting tea parties to attract visitors and collectors to her studio. She was also receiving royalties from her family's coal. I guess they had a coal mine or coal industry in West Virginia. And also during the 30s, she was part of the work that, what is it?
WPA, the Works Progress
I always
Administration.
forget that one. Works Progress Administration. So she was, a single woman, but still financially self-sustaining at that time. So, she
That's
was a model. Yeah.
that she was, and she was exhibiting all over the country, and she really took it up as a cause with these various print societies. In some of the archives and the letters she wrote, that in following up basically on things that Ada Gilmore had been pointing out, that that they had been sort of neglected because they didn't really like the modern printmaker sort of thing. So it wasn't really until even into the 20s that really became, more of a norm and accepted. And she was one of the people that really broke through all of that, because she made herself heard that each piece was unique, and she didn't like the way that they had formats for how the things had to be matted and shown, and that didn't always work with the size of the prints that they were making. Basically, some fascinating letters and things that kind of like show all of that.
Her studio here in Provincetown was sort of considered to be one of the major stopping points when you were coming to Provincetown to stop and visit her. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore.
We
Yeah.
found that out when we had organized, a studio tour for when the Paris to Provincetown exhibit opened at the Museum of Fine Arts with the Garfield collection. And, Barbara Shapiro, who had been involved in the curation of all of that, we had all gotten together with Michael Mazer and planned all these things. But suddenly it was gone. And it's what we do in the winter.
Mhm.
People are away.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore. But it's like definitely a loss, that people are more careful to try to protect some of these
Yeah.
historic buildings.
But we have good pictures.
We do. We
We
have
see
great
her with
pictures
her,
out on the
the
deck,
hollyhock flowers and yeah,
and her petunias, which
petunias.
she was particularly fond of. And you see this more in some of the earlier abstract prints from the 20s. And also she had one which you probably noticed in the show, that's a black line print. So it's just kind of exactly the opposite, so that the line actually the key block kind of shows that.
So when was she here in Provincetown? Because she came
She she
from.
wa she was here, like, once she got here, she outside of, like, going off to Paris or whatever and back to West Virginia or New York or around, she was here, until her death in
And
1956.
she was here year round, or she would go winter back in West Virginia, or.
She did some of that, but she actually did spend winters here as well, and then it became harder for her. In the end, she had suffered a seizure and wound up actually dying in the hospital down in Bourne.
And after she passed, can we say that her art was forgotten for a while?
Well, there was no one sending it out to all of these exhibitions around the
Because she
country.
was her own manager.
And, I mean, and she showed even, like after she was there in Paris, women's group and other national shows. It had a period until, like it started getting more excited. I remember that, one of our big, like in the auction that I'd done in like 1988, I had a Lazzell print that, not to talk monetary, but like sold for 12,000, which was like it was the, top price. It was an auction record for one of her prints back in '88, and now, a similar print or whatever sold a few years ago for 150,000. When people take notice when things like that happen,
Yeah.
like, or when a painting of hers brings 500 and plus thousand.
So she has sort of reclaimed her. Yeah.
She's reclaimed a lot, and the
Hmm.
interest between some of these top collectors, Leslie Garfield in New York, who subsequently his collections is at the Museum of Fine Arts and gets shown again. Well, again, recently they had shown a lot of those works.
One thing I always wonder about wood blocks is you have the print, but you also have the wood block. You have the actual block. And in the museum, you have a few of these blocks on show as well. Is there a value for these blocks? Do they sell also on the art
Oh, yeah.
market, or is it just the print that counts?
Oh no, the blocks sell. They can bring as much as the print.
I would imagine
Depending
so, yeah.
on, and in a number of cases, we actually had a show at the gallery of Ruth Hogan, who had been doing white line prints, and we had a show with the blocks and the print in cases. Like, basically, she actually used oil paint over, so it's like a paint, that it's not the original saturation of the color of the last print, that they were all like additions of how many. Blanche never, she kept a beautiful like record book, so that there were 10 prints, taken. This was block number 4, and was carved 1919, Provincetown or Virginia, wherever she had done that. But they weren't a planned edition, so there are prints that there's only 1 copy, other prints that she did 25, but never necessarily completed any of that.
Well, I've learned, because I do some printing as well, I've learned that it's very important to maintain your records because especially, well,
Sign everything.
sign everything and
There's
also keep, because sometimes what happens is I'll create 5 prints at a time, but then the 5th one sells and I forget what was the number of that one. I may have to make other ones, and now what was the number? And that's why I keep a record of all these things. How many have I made? Until what number have I printed? And if I want to print more, from which number do I have to start? Because otherwise you can get really easily messed up in your print
Mhm.
counts. Printing is a whole different type of art. It's not just one painting on the wall. It's making sure you maintain some sort of regularity in what you're doing, and maintain a rarity of it as well. You don't want to produce, hundreds and hundreds, and then it's
No.
just a piece of paper. But you don't want to produce so few that it's.
Well, that's one of the
Yeah.
the keys, and where does that lie? And people that are, were still working with Prince, Catherine Lee Smith and Billy Vall, they've both taken it to kind of different levels. Bill's gone big. There, like prints beyond the scope of what any of the original Provincetown printers thought. To have a
Yeah,
three by
Bill
six
Evol
foot
will make white line prints that
print.
are 6 feet by 2 feet. They're very large. You would not imagine you can make a print that large, but he does.
In the Catherine Smith, she learned as a child from her grandmother Farrell Worth, and like again, like kept very good records, and she was actually one of the first white line artists that we represented when we were still in the Boston Gallery, and then here in Provincetown before we basically stopped showing most of the living painters.
So there's still a tradition of white line printing in Provincetown,
Definitely.
and it has evolved in some ways, as we talked about Bill Evol making these very large prints, and he makes them with oil paint as well. And are there any other evolutions that have happened in the printing style since Blanche Lazzell?
Well, I think a lot of it, she even started, and may have been one of the reasons why she was overlooked for a long period of time, beyond the fact that she didn't have a really great dealer that was pushing her, like Georgia O'Keeffe and Stieglitz, the combination of what makes, a great woman painter. They want to be a great American modernist, not an American woman modernist.
Yeah. And most of her work is now at the University of West Virginia. And the exhibit you have here right now,
Was organized by Bob
yeah.
Bridges, who
So they are the ones that are the steward of most of her work right now.
yes.
Yeah. And how much of her work is still here in Provincetown?
There's still a number of pieces, and I think one of the, um, nice things about this show in Provincetown, this is like a world-class show. This is something that could have been at the Met or could have been, like wherever, because to have funding to ship paintings like that and to, uh the stewardship involved and the finance involved for insurance and various things that go into a show like that. And in this particular show, because of the having some, prints being owned locally, Chris McCarthy was able to change it because the show had traveled previously to the Bruce Museum in Connecticut. And this features a number of extra and Provincetown prints.
And Christine
And
McCarthy, when she was on the Art Colony podcast, one of her first shows, she was saying that, her dream show is to have a Blanche Lazzell show at the museum, and that's what we're having now.
that's
Yeah.
great.
And yeah, I was wondering, how does this whole process come together? How do you curate an exhibit like this? Because you have so many moving pieces. How does that work?
Uh, well, it worked, uniquely here, because of the space and being able to do that. And the thought was that maybe we didn't need as many of the West Virginia prints, but it was all in tandem, in agreement with West Virginia University and, the changes in the space because the space is different and, the colored background at the Bruce Museum different than, how it was here. And so every place is sort of unique to where it goes.
Do you feel it's important for us to have a show of her work right now in Provincetown?
Oh, yes. This is this is where she really found herself, I think, in, the companionship that she had here with other artists. I think she would be thrilled.
Well, of course she would. Yeah. And do you feel that her reputation as an artist will change because of a show like this?
Certainly will increase. I think that there's now interest, like among lots of museums that would be thrilled to get something like this to show or to have in their collections. There's a wonderful museum, the Museum of American Arts and Crafts in Florida that has one of the great collections of color woodcuts, and I think, continues to acquire pieces.
Do you think that's a tradition that now will be um, promoted, revived, more popular to do the white line print?
I don't know. I hope that there are artists that are finding inspiration from seeing the show.
Well, I have to say that I went to the exhibit. I've been 3 times already, and I saw the documentary film that Amy Davies from the
Oh, yeah.
museum produced and that you're featured in. And then I also saw that there were classes offered along with the exhibit to learn the basics of white line printing. So I'm doing that class in 2
With
weeks
with Billy
with
Vol.
Billy Vol.
Oh,
So
no.
I'm really looking forward to learning more about that. But if, for example, somebody wants to learn to, create white line prints, is Provincetown the only place where this is taught, or is this the best place where
It
this is taught?
I would say that it's the best place
Yeah.
where it's taught, and that they should go to the PAAM website, PAAM.org,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
like, register for a class or for a talk. There's still tours of the show, and you can check and see what all those events are.
'Cause there's events all the way until January 4th.
Yes.
But yeah, I was looking, at the way these prints are made, and I was thinking that would be great in my gallery. Because in the summer, I'm sitting there and there's visitors coming all the time, and I don't necessarily have a lot of space. But if it's something that I can do, like, one little cell at a time,
Oh,
as
you
as I'm dealing with clients, I could probably do something
it'd
like
be
that on my table.
it'd be therapeutic.
Exactly, yeah. So we'll see because, the other types of prints I do are silkscreen prints or monotype prints for which I need, large equipment, a lot of water and chemicals and big sinks, and I can't really do that in my gallery, but that looked like something that probably I could manage on my table.
You could.
Yeah, yeah.
And, it's the thing that I also know, that Blanche Lazzell, like, she taught batik, and, so that you get this thing, which I think that some people think that that may have been like not necessarily the greatest thing for her, but she made hooked rugs, she
Mhm.
decorated pottery. She, the arts and crafts nature of it, that whether people consider it art or craft, that she kind of led the way to that and wasn't afraid of doing anything,
Well, that's great. I
trying
think
new
I think
things.
nowadays more and more there's less of a demarcation between what's art and crafts. And in the past, I feel that women were often discounted because they were not doing just oil painting. They were doing, as you were saying, pottery or prints or textile work, and that was seen as women's work. Therefore, it's not art. But I think nowadays that distinction is really blurring.
Starting.
Yeah. For example, at the Commons right now, there's a number of artists who are in their studios that are not just doing oil painting. There's one person there right now who's making lampshades, and
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah.
they're very artistic, very involved pieces that are pieces of art. But maybe, in the 1930s and 40s, she would not have been considered in the same league as oil painters. But nowadays, we don't necessarily have this demarcation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that there's a lot more openness to the different things, and you see, in a lot of the members open and members juried shows,
At the
at
Provincetown Art
PAM,
Museum, yeah.
yeah, the there's, outside of the size limitations on some of them, there's a lot of new stuff that seems to be emerging that people are interested in.
Yeah, and that's one of the things you can do in the off season here to get back to my speech at the beginning of the episode. We have the jury shows, and there's a deadline coming up in a few weeks for the members' small pieces show.
Which is always a good one.
Yeah, so and they have these exhibits on view all winter long. There's always something to do here. We're never bored. Well, this has been a really fun way to get to learn more about Blanche Lazzell. A great way to get to learn more about her work, her personality, her presence here in town. And I highly recommend anyone who hasn't seen the show to go over and learn more about this very important slice of history here.
It is a great opportunity that you don't have to travel off Cape, it's right here.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much for joining us to talk about Blanche Lazzell, and until next time.